The other has to attend the courts because a chauffeur is being accused of kidnapping his daughter. Well, enough of that. If you should really have to exist among these favorites of yours, you will at least know from this last talk of mine that although the physicians there write a dozen wiseacring names in their prescriptions, yet in these official establishments of theirs, which are called pharmacies, their remedies are prepared almost always after the fashion of that Dover's powder. It even happens there that occasionally these kind pharmacists prepare early in the morning a whole barrel of some liquid and a whole box of some powder, and during the entire day they satisfy everyone bringing prescriptions, either by pouring from that common barrel or by taking powder from that common box. In order that this mixture prepared betimes should not always have the same appearance, these kind professionals put in something for coloring with various colors and for changing the taste and smell. In spite of all that I've said, however, I advise you very strongly to be extremely careful with one kind of their remedies, because it does sometimes happen there that these kind pharmacists put into these mixtures something poisonous for the planetary body, of course by mistake. Moreover, for the beings with normal reason, the custom has been established there, of course accidentally, always to depict on the labels of mixtures of that kind what is called a skull and crossbones, so that it may be possible always to distinguish that kind of poisonous remedy from the ordinary medicinal means. However, in any case, do remember that from among the number of many thousands of known medical means applied by the contemporary physicians there, only 3, and even then only sometimes, produce some or other real results for the planetary body of your contemporary, ordinary 3-brained beings. One of these 3 medical means which does sometimes nevertheless produce a useful reaction is that substance, or more strictly speaking, those active elements entering into it, which the beings of Maral-Plessis learned how to obtain from the plant poppy, and which they were the first to call opium. The second substance is that which is called their castor oil. This substance was already used long ago by the beings of Egypt for embalming their mummies, and it was they who also noticed that this substance has, among other things, that action for which it is now used. But the knowledge about this castor oil passed also to these beings of Egypt from the beings of the continent Atlantis, who belonged to the learned society Akaldan. And the third substance is that which has been obtained there by beings from the dawn of centuries from what is called the cinchona tree. Now listen, my boy, to the information about the newly invented name of those terrestrial contemporary physicians articulated as doctor. It would seem that this invention is that also of the beings of the important community of Germany there, and they invented this articulation for the purpose of defining some merit or other of some among them. But this same invention of theirs, which was widely spread on the whole of their planet, became, for some reason or other, the ordinary nominal name for all the contemporary physicians there. It must be even emphasized that, thanks to this invention of theirs, there was added there yet one more to the number of factors, the totality of which constantly leads them into error, and by which their being mentation, already weakened without this, becomes year by year more machohichni. On account of this new word of theirs, even our Ahun, in spite of his having an incomparably more normal presence, and being clothed with a being reason of higher quality, had, while we were there, a very disagreeable, even an almost idiotic misunderstanding. As for the rest, it will, in my opinion, be much better if he tells you all about it himself. Having said this, Beelzebub addressed himself to Ahun in the following words: Tell us, old man, how this then happened, and what made you for several days, the whole time, skuyachini and tsirikuakst, or as the three-brained beings of the planet Earth would say, made you just grumble and be irritable like your friend there, Dame Bess. To this Ahun, again imitating the style of Beelzebub, and this time even his very intonation, began to relate as follows. This misunderstanding happened to me owing to the following cause. During this 6th visit of ours to the planet Earth, just toward the very end, we had to exist, by the way, for a little while also in the capital of those same German beings who, as his reverence condescended to say, invented just this word accursed for me, doctor. In the hotel, where we had the place of our existence, next to my room, or as is said there, in the number next to mine, there existed a very sympathetic pair of beings who had only recently completed the sacrament of the union of the active with the passive for the purpose of serving the great, all-universal trogoauto-egocratic process for the prolongation of their generation. Or, as they themselves would say, had been married, and they were still considered newlywed. Well, with this young couple, I accidentally became acquainted in the house of some friends of mine, after which this couple often began to invite me to their room for what is called their cup of tea. At other times, I even myself, without their invitation, used to drop in on them in order to shorten the wearisome German evenings. She was, as is said there, in an interesting condition, and, according also to their expression, was expecting her firstborn. They, as well as I, were in that capital for an indefinite period and on the business for the profession of the active half of this young couple, and they were therefore existing in that hotel in which we were just staying. There once resounded from them a very nervous rapping on the wall of my room. I instantly ran to them, and it turned out there that himself was not at home, for on that very day he had to go off somewhere, and during this time she had felt faint, and almost without consciousness had instinctively rapped on my wall. When I entered, she also felt somewhat better, but imploringly asked me to hurry for a doctor. I instantly, of course, rushed out into the street, but once there I thought, but where am I to go now? Suddenly I remembered that not far from our hotel a being lived whom everybody called Doctor. It was even marked on a metal plate in front of his name on the door that he was a doctor, and it was to this doctor that I ran. But it turned out that he was dining, and therefore his servant asked me to wait a little in the drawing room, having explained to me that the doctor would have finished dinner immediately with his guests and would soon be coming out. I, of course, sat down in the drawing room awaiting this doctor, but it could scarcely be said that I sat very quietly. I was sitting there as if, as beings say there, on live coals, because I was most anxious about the condition of my neighbor. But the honorable doctor, however, never came. Almost 20 minutes passed. I could not bear it any longer, and rang the bell. When the servant entered, I asked her to remind the doctor about me and to say that I was in a very great hurry and could not wait any longer for him. She went away. Another 5 minutes passed. At last, the doctor himself appeared. Hurriedly, I shortly explained to him what I wanted from him, but to my astonishment, he began to laugh irrepressibly at my request. I thought, obviously during dinner with his friends, this doctor had drunk more than one glass too much of German beer. And only when he had calmed down a little from his hysterical laughter could he tell me that, to his great regret, he was not a doctor of medicine, but only a doctor of philosophy. At that moment I experienced such a state as if, as it were, I were for the second time hearing our endlessness's sentence of exile passed upon his reverence and those nearest him, and in consequence upon me. Well, our dear Hussein, I left the drawing room of that doctor, and was once more out in the street in the same position as before. Just then, a taxi happened to pass. I got into it and began to reflect, where now? I then remembered that in that cafe where I sometimes went, a being also almost always went whom everybody called Doctor. I ordered the chauffeur to hurry to this cafe. There, a waiter known to me told me that this same doctor had indeed been there, but had just left with some of his acquaintances, and that he, the waiter, had accidentally overheard from their conversation that they were going to such and such a restaurant, and gave me the name of this restaurant. Although this restaurant was some way away, yet nevertheless I ordered the chauffeur to go there, as I knew of no other doctor. At length, in half an hour, we came to this restaurant, and there I very soon found this doctor. Once again, this time, he turned out not to be a physician, but a doctor of jurisprudence. I was completely, as is said there, in the soup. At last it entered my head that I might address myself to the head waiter of the restaurant and explain to him in detail what I required. This head waiter turned out to be a very kind being. He not only explained to me what had to be done, but even went with me to a certain physician, this time called a doctor accoucheur. We found him by chance at home, and he was kind enough to agree to go with me at once. But while we were on the way, my poor neighbor had already brought forth a boy, her firstborn, and having somehow swaddled the baby without anyone's help, was already sound asleep after the terrible torments she had borne in solitude. And so from that day, I have with my whole being hated the sound of the word doctor, and to each of the beings of the planet Earth I would advise him to use this word only when he is very angry. That you may better understand the significance of the contemporary physicians on your planet, it is also necessary to tell you of the saying of our highly esteemed Mullah Nasruddin concerning these same contemporary physicians. He speaks of them thus: "For our sins, God has sent us two kinds of physicians, one kind to help us die, and the other to prevent us living.